Hello, my name is Viviana Gaballo. This presentation is about the use of, or better, the lack of use of translation in CLIL, Content and Language Integrated Learning. Introducing some basic concepts, I'll very briefly discuss the key approaches and models that foster the integration of translation into CLIL pedagogy. I'll refer to the context of application. Finally, I'll draw some conclusions. For the sake of clarity, let's first share some basic vocabulary, starting from CLIL, of which I'll give a revised division at the end of the presentation. So, what's CLIL? The most cited definition is by Coyle, Hood and Nash, who in 2010 defined it as a dual-focused educational approach in which an additional language is used for the learning and teaching of both content and language. And by the way, an additional language is often a learner's for a language, but it may also be a second language or some form of heritage or community language. This definition highlights the fact that in the teaching and learning process in CLIL, there is a focus not only on content and not only on language. Each is interwoven, even if the emphasis is greater on one or the other at a given time. So by 2010, we had the perception of CLIL as an innovative fusion of both language education and subject education. Only 7 years later, a definition by Dalton Puffer opens up to a broader view of CLIL as an approach that aims to transcend established pedagogic practices in both content and language education in order to create an innovative space where fields of learning separated by tradition can be brought together. This definition proves how the idea of CLIL is developing in time, and we'll see how it may become even more inclusive in just 3 years. Now, in order to fully understand the role of CLIL, a comparison of the different types of foreign language teaching may help to provide a better picture of how CLIL differentiates from other methodologies. As can be seen from this chart, the fundamental difference between LGP and non-LGP types of foreign language teaching lies in the different use of language between the language class and the content class. In the language class, the 4 skills, reading, writing, listening, speaking, are part of the learning outcomes and are used as a tool for introducing new language and for practicing and checking linguistic knowledge. In the content classroom, the 4 skills are a means of learning new content and displaying an understanding of the subject being taught. The language is therefore a means to an end rather than an end in itself. And the structure and style of the language practice is often less colloquial and more complex, as Dylan Price pointed out in 2007. One more useful view of CLIL refers to how it is positioned in the panorama of ELT. The first chart that I've selected to illustrate the point focuses on the different methodologies used to teach EFL and ESL, and sees CLIL as central in the virtual continuum between structure-based instruction in EFL and natural acquisition in ESL, locating it within the framework of communicative instruction. The second chart provides a debatable map of ELT in 4 quadrants: language needs, tools, and learning, which sees CLIL as totally decentralized in the learning quadrant and very distant from anything else. However, all these different types of foreign language teaching have one thing in common: monolingual teaching, a legacy of the audiolingual method, situational language teaching, and communicative language teaching. Despite the overwhelming force of the arguments and evidence in favor of bilingual language teaching in a globalized multilingual world, many curricula, institutions, syllabus and materials designers, as well as teachers, parents, and of course students, remain committed to monolingual teaching. This is what Guy Cook and Graham Hall say in their 2012 article on language use in language teaching and learning, state of the art. There is a section in the article that they've titled Entrenched Monolingualism in ELT, that actually should read Entrenched Monolingualism in CLIL, as it is totally devoted to discussing both monolingualism and CLIL and criticizing both, as is apparent from some of the quotations drawn from the article. The first one reads, "A notable manifestation of die-hard monolingualism, strangely posing as a new approach, is content-based language teaching, which signifies the author's dismissiveness of the CLIL methodology altogether. They note how, in practice, CLIL is most frequently used to extend the teaching of English, and they find this strikingly odd, as the EU had committed itself to maintaining linguistic diversity, whereas English medium CLIL in Europe has received intensive support." Another quotation worth reading refers to bilingualism and the use of own language, which CLIL proponents seems to have banned. Bilingual teaching, translanguaging in the CLIL jargon, is seen as something which will and should wither away, and this is taken from March 2002. Guy and Hall note how the rationale behind this virtually ignores the complex impact on diversity and identity both of this major extension of English into classrooms and subject areas where students' own language previously held sway, and in contexts where the ex-colonial language maintains its dominant position. While, and this is the last quotation chosen, while there is surprisingly little academic criticism of English medium CLIL, those asked to implement it sometimes express strong opposition and suspicion of the motives behind it. Cook had already noted in 2010 that it is also seen as detrimental to the maintenance of linguistic diversity. In the history of foreign language learning, the pendulum has swung back and forth between focus on language analysis and focus on language use, with translation having a decreasing impact on foreign language learning as the pendulum swung towards language use. Translation was considered either essential, for instance within the frame of the grammar translation method, or detrimental in the context of various communicatively oriented approaches. However, in recent years, an increasing number of pleas, for instance Houghton, Willistone, Carreras and Cook, an increasing number of pleas have been made for a more balanced examination of the use of translation in foreign language teaching. But how can translation be used in CLIL? While literature abounds in writings about translation as the fifth skill in foreign language teaching, very little consideration has been given to the use of translation in CLIL. I'll start by referring to the theory of linguistic interdependence by James Cummings from the University of Toronto, according to which two languages are like two separate icebergs, but only apparently so, because under the surface they belong to the same large piece of ice. This submerged area is what Cummings defines as the common underlying proficiency, the CUP. What does this mean? that knowledge of a language at levels higher than colloquial use, knowledge at a more academic level, provides the minds with resources to acquire a second language, and a third and a fourth, etc., because the skills that require greater cognitive efforts, such as reading, writing, content learning, abstract thinking, and problem solving, are common to all languages and use this area of knowledge. Also, translation belongs to these skills. CLIL identifies a transition stage at which learners become fully functional in both languages, and is open to a wide range of approaches which enable learners to arrive at this stage. Translation is an acceptable tool, particularly where the concurrent use of two languages enables concepts to be understood and depth of comprehension to be achieved. So what we need now is a reference model that will guide us to identify the competences needed to carry out specific real-life tasks and turn the model into an operational map of individual learning units. The systemic functional competence model that you can see on this slide recalls the competence model I developed in 2009 to fully describe the difference between language and translation competence. I'm not going through it in detail because of time constraints, but I'll say very briefly that it aims at creating a synergetic interaction of LGP competence that is more likely to be targeted in the upper part of the background competences, that is the linguistic, extralinguistics, and socio-cognitive competences, and LSP, CLIL, or translation competences that are more likely to address the lower part of the background competences, specifically the epistemological, instrumental, and professional competences. Attention is not focused on any of the elements in particular, but on the network of interrelationships that come into play. But how do we go about turning our model into an operating agenda? Our starting point is, as in any curriculum or syllabus design, needs analysis. The concept of need analysis I referred to is the one proposed by Dudley, Evans, and St. John's in 1998, because it encompasses previous approaches and can be extended to host new needs and methodologies. It includes an all-encompassing rubric of indicators that may cater well for a needs analysis applied to CLIL, but would still fall short, as it should be complemented with more specific indicators aiming to address the needs of today's connected learners. That is, the additional building blocks shown in green on this slide. The first building block concerns learners' information fluency, that is, the learner's level of digital literacy. This integrates the ability to collect the information necessary to consider a problem or an issue, the abilities to employ critical thinking skills in the evaluation and analysis of the information and its sources, and the abilities to formulate domain-specific logical conclusions and present these conclusions in an appropriate and effective way. The second building block regards learners' CMC skills, computer-mediated communication skills. That is, the learner's ability to initiate and maintain dialogue online, to construct an argument, compare opposing arguments, make judgments online, to share ideas, opinions, etc., and co-construct knowledge online. It integrates the ability to contextualize the information fluency, but not only, in a computer-mediated, interactive, communicative exchange, therefore projecting the individual dimension onto a virtual social dimension of communication. The third building block is about learners' epistemic fluency. That is, the abilities, predispositions, and practices involved in combining multiple ways of knowing, where epistemological beliefs are not fixed traits, but reconfigurable mental resources. Within the systemic functional model, the epistemological competence is a point of entry that provides the framework that explains how a subject is organized. It provides insight into its conceptual relevance, that is, the facts, concepts, rules, and methods typical of the subject or subjects, insight into its cognitive significance, that is, the mental processes, motivations, and attitudes developed through learning that specific subject or subjects, and insight into its social utility, that is, the external relations and contexts of use. And it informs the whole system. In CLIL, we need to analyze both subjects together, that is, both the language and the content, in order to point out common features that might facilitate learning. The analysis of the conceptual relevance will suggest how to organize the object of teaching for both language and content, how to order them in their mutual, useful, logical sequence, and how to control the complexity of the ensuing system. Let's assume that after analyzing the conceptual relevance and cognitive significance of the subject's law and language, we come to the resolution that one of the main nodes for, say, MA students in law are contract law and the language of contracts. How do we organize the teaching and learning activities according to a CLIL pedagogy that incorporates translation as well? We determine what items of the individual competences we would like our law students to target that relate to the nodes, language and contracts. Starting from the epistemological competence, we determine what to teach in terms of concepts and methods of contract law and legal language that is most relevant and significant to learners in both systems, linguistic and the legal system. Guided by the model, we select the facts, rules, and principles to be treated. We highlight any non-equivalences between the systems. Finally, we derived the methods of the integrated subjects and the appropriate tools to be used in order to deal with some conceptual issues. We determined, for instance, that students need to achieve epistemic fluency, that is to say, the ability to recognize and practice a culture's epistemic forms, that is, the target structures that humans use to construct knowledge, to understand the different forms of expressions and evaluation, and to take the perspective of interlocutors who are operating within epistemic frameworks. Here, Collins' idea of epistemic forms, coupled with the writer's notion of conceptual artifacts, can be used to help students understand how they should be representing new knowledge within a professional culture. For instance, the different types of contracts studied from the legal point of view in both legal systems, civil and common law, and from the linguistic point of view of both languages, the own language and the additional language. Lexicogrammar patterns such as collocations, colligation, semantic preference, and semantic prosody, or the study of modalities, are examined and compared by working on LSP comparable or parallel corpora that students learn to investigate in order to complete their translation tasks, which they will revise individually in small groups and in the larger class group, according to professional standards. The aim for learners is to achieve communicative action skills, that is, the ability for the self-reflective subject to justify action to those affected by it. Language and translations are practiced seamlessly in this context, and almost seamless with language and translation is also the study of the legal systems involved and the application of digital technology to the legal contexts used to enhance professional communication. Time's up, so I'd like to conclude this presentation by providing a new definition of CLIL based on what we've seen so far. So what is CLIL? Content and Language Integrated Learning is an educational approach aiming at the integration of language, the own language plus additional language or languages, digital and subject competences. Here is a list of the references used for this presentation for your perusal. And thank you very much for your attention.